My name is Sophie, and I never imagined that starting a new job could put my life in danger. Not physically but emotionally. My boss harassed me at work and I thought I was safe at home. Until I discovered that my husband was cheating on me. This is my story, from the first uneasy glance at the office to the day I realized everything I trusted was a shadows at the office. I never thought starting a new job would feel like stepping into a war zone. My name is Sophie and I had just moved to the city for a fresh start. I thought a new office, new colleagues, and a steady paycheck would be my escape from all the stress at home. I didn't know then that the stress would follow me, in ways I couldn't imagine. The first week was normal enough. People smiled politely, introduced themselves, showed me where the coffee machine was. I kept my head down, learning procedures, trying not to stand out. Then came Mr. Carter, the director. Tall, impeccably dressed, always smiling, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. From the first meeting, something about him felt off. He asked too many personal questions, lingered a little too long when shaking my hand, and often offered help that made me uncomfortable. At first I brushed it off. Maybe I was just nervous. Maybe I was overthinking. But the incidents multiplied. A hand resting on my shoulder while he leaned over my desk. Comments about how someone as pretty as me shouldn't be working such late hours alone. Emails that seemed professional but carried a tone I couldn't ignore. Subtle, pressing, invasive. I told myself to stay professional. I couldn't let him see fear. I couldn't tell my husband. I wanted him to think I was managing fine. He had enough on his plate, I thought. But then the subtle unease turned into a gnawing anxiety. My stomach knotted before every meeting. I started avoiding the elevator, taking longer routes to my desk, pretending to answer calls just to keep him at a distance. And through it all, I kept believing that my marriage was my safe harbor. That at least home would be a place where I could breathe. I was wrong. It started with a casual text message one evening while I was finishing work late. "Hey, I'm going out for drinks with some colleagues. See you later, love." My husband, Mark, always careful, always attentive, had never skipped a message or an explanation. But that night I got a pang, something I didn't understand. Over the next few days, small inconsistencies started stacking up. A missed call he didn't return. A friend's vague remark about seeing him somewhere he said he wasn't. Little things I could have ignored until the pieces started to form a picture I didn't want to see. I started keeping my phone close, tracking patterns, replaying conversations. And one morning, while looking for an old photo, I stumbled across something. A message thread I wasn't meant to. Oh, see. Everything hit at once. He was cheating. The man I trusted, the man I loved, was betraying me. I slumped against the wall, heart pounding, trying to make sense of it. The betrayal at work, the harassment from Mr. Carter, and now my husband's infidelity. It all collided into a storm I wasn't prepared for. And I realized in that moment that my life as I knew it was over. The tightening grip. The days that followed were unbearable. At work, Mr. Carter's attention became sharper, more intrusive. He would call me into his office under the pretense of reviewing reports, but his words lingered on things that had nothing to do with work. "You seem tense, Sophie. Maybe you need someone to help you relax after hours." I smiled politely, kept my tone professional, and excused myself. But inside, a knot tightened in my chest. Each encounter left me more anxious, more exhausted. I began counting the hours until I could leave, but leaving didn't mean relief anymore. At home, the supposed safe harbor, I felt a new kind of unease. Mark was distracted, distant, and increasingly vague about his whereabouts. I wanted to confront him, but a part of me feared the answer. One evening, I stayed late at the office to finish a project. The empty floor, the hum of fluorescent lights, and the quiet clicking of my keyboard should have been calming. Instead, it felt suffocating. Mr. Carter appeared at the doorway, smiling as if nothing was wrong. "Still working late, Sophie? I can help you. You know I'm always here if you need anything." I forced a polite laugh. "Thank you, but I think I've got it under control." His smile didn't falter, but his eyes lingered on me in a way that made me shiver. By the end of that week I was exhausted, emotionally frayed, and constantly looking over my shoulder. At home, Mark's distant texts and vague excuses gnawed at me. I started noticing small contradictions in his stories. A lunch he said he had with a colleague, a meeting he claimed to attend, they didn't add up. I didn't want to believe it. I couldn't. But the signs multiplied, stacking themselves into a truth I wasn't ready to face. Then came the first undeniable proof. An email on his work account accidentally sent to me instead of someone else. A short message, casual, affectionate. I read it 3 times, each word burning deeper than the last. He was cheating. Sitting there staring at the screen, I felt my world collapse. Not just the betrayal from Mark, but the unbearable tension at work that had followed me home. My life had become a series of traps. One at the office, one in my own home. I realized then that the only way to survive was to gather the pieces, understand what was happening, and plan my next steps carefully. I couldn't let panic dictate my choices. But understanding doesn't stop your heart from break. The confrontation and secrets unveiled. I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. Every lie, every hint, every contradiction had formed a web I was trapped in. At work, Mr. Carter's behavior escalated. He would stand too close, brush off comments that I tried to set as boundaries, and occasionally leave notes on my desk. Subtle, suggestive, framed as encouragement. One afternoon I decided to confront him. I told myself I had to set limits, to reclaim control over my own space. "Mr. Carter, I'm uncomfortable with how personal this is getting," I said, my voice trembling more than I wanted. His smile didn't falter. "Sophie, don't be silly. I'm only trying to help. You know I want the best for you." I realized then that manipulation doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers, and you're too polite, too afraid, or too invested to hear it for what it is. That night I went home exhausted. My phone buzzed. A message from Mark. "Can we talk tonight?" I felt a knot in my stomach. I wanted to ignore it, pretend nothing was wrong, but curiosity and dread pushed me to open the door to the nightmare waiting inside my own marriage. When he arrived, he was smiling, that familiar warm smile that used to make me feel safe. But tonight it felt like a mask. "You okay?" he asked. "We need to talk," I said, my hands shaking. I confronted him with the evidence I had. The subtle inconsistencies, the accidental email, the things that didn't fit. He froze, blinked, and then tried to explain. "It's not what you think," he said, voice low. "Then tell me what it is," I replied, almost whispering. Piece by piece the truth came out. He had been unfaithful, with someone I knew, someone I trusted. I couldn't breathe. Every word felt like a hammer striking my chest. And as I processed the shock, I realized the cruelest part. The man who was supposed to be my safe harbor had become another source of betrayal, just like Mr. Carter at work. I spent the next hours pacing, trying to reconcile 2 harsh realities. The harassment I endured at work. The infidelity of the man I loved. Both left me feeling powerless, isolated, and entirely alone in a world that was supposed to be familiar. I felt trapped, but I thought I was safe at home, I whispered to the empty apartment. I didn't know if I could face either tomorrow, the office or my marriage. But I knew one thing. I couldn't ignore the truth and why longer, the break. Point. The next morning I woke up with a heaviness I couldn't shake. Every thought seemed wrapped in fog. I couldn't eat, couldn't focus, couldn't pretend. At work, Mr. Carter's presence was suffocating. Every glance, every word, Every casual remark carried double meaning. "Sophie, are you sure you finished that report? Maybe I can help you after hours." I clenched my jaw and forced a polite nod, but inside anger and fear churned. I realized then that this harassment was more than uncomfortable. It was a trap. He was testing boundaries, pushing limits, and I had to decide how far I was willing to let it go. That evening I came home exhausted. Mark was there, pretending normalcy, pouring himself a drink, laughing at something trivial. "You've been quiet," he said. "Just tired," I muttered, my stomach twisting. But I couldn't ignore it anymore. I brought up the email, the inconsistencies, the nights he came home late. His face hardened. "Sophie, I can explain." I shook my head. "No. I don't want explanations. I want the truth." And then it all spilled out. The lies, the hidden meetings, the betrayals. Every word was a dagger. My safe harbor had been a mirage. My trust shattered. I collapsed on the couch, tears streaming down, feeling every ounce of betrayal from both sides. Work harassment and marital infidelity. Two walls closing in, leaving me gasping for air. The next days were a blur. I started documenting everything. Notes from the office, messages from Mark, dates, incidents. I knew I had to reclaim control in some way, to protect myself, my sanity, and maybe even my future. At work, I avoided being alone with Mr. Carter. I learned to navigate the office like a minefield, every step calculated, every smile cautious. At home, I stayed awake late into the night, reading messages, replaying conversations, analyzing every detail of Mark's betrayal. Sometimes betrayal comes from those you love the most. I whispered into the darkness, my reflection in the window staring back at me. By the end of the week, I realized I had to act, both for my dignity and my safety. I couldn't undo what had happened, but I could decide how I would respond. And deep down, I knew the breaking point wasn't the moment I discovered the truth. It was the moment I accepted it. The reckoning. By the following Monday, I knew I couldn't continue hiding. The harassment at work and the betrayal at home had grown into twin monsters I could no longer ignore. At the office, I requested a private meeting with HR. My hands shook as I typed the email, but the words felt like armor. "I need to report inappropriate behavior from my supervisor. Please schedule a meeting as soon as possible." The response came within the hour. The HR manager, a calm woman named Linda, asked me to come in that afternoon. Sitting across from her, I recounted everything. Every comment, every unwanted touch, every suggestive message. Linda listened carefully, taking notes, her eyes never leaving mine. "You did the right thing, Sophie," she said softly. "We'll handle this. You're not alone." For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of relief. Even though fear lingered, I had taken a step to reclaim power. That night, I returned home, exhausted but determined. Mark was there, casually flipping through channels, his presence a dull ache in my chest. I confronted him again, this time armed with the documentation I'd gathered. Messages, dates, contradictions. "Mark, I know everything," I said, voice steady but icy. He froze. "Sophie, I can explain." "No. You lied. You betrayed me. And you can't fix this with excuses anymore." He tried to defend himself, to deflect blame, but the truth was undeniable. Every word, every lie, every betrayal stood between us like a wall I could no longer climb. In the following days, I started taking steps to separate my life from his. I opened a new bank account. I researched legal options quietly. I leaned on close friends, sharing fragments of the truth with them. And while the pain was raw, every action made me feel a little more like myself. At work, Linda and HR acted swiftly. Mr. Carter was formally reprimanded, removed from direct supervision, and ordered to attend mandatory training. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was justice of a kind. and it reminded me that speaking up mattered. For the first time in weeks, I slept without my chest tightening, without dreading every interaction. I realized that the reckoning wasn't about punishment. It was about reclaiming control, facing betrayal, and refusing to be defined by what others had done to me. I thought I was trapped, I whispered, looking at the empty apartment, but I'm learning to breathe again. The storm wasn't over. Healing would take time. But I had taken the first steps, the hardest steps, toward freedom, moving forward. Conclusion. Weeks turned into months. The apartment slowly felt like my own again. The tension at work eased as Mr. Carter was transferred, and my colleagues' behavior shifted once the truth was out. Some avoided me awkwardly, others offered quiet support. At home, Mark had moved out temporarily. The apartment was quieter, emptier, but in a strange way that silence felt like relief. I no longer had to tiptoe around someone who had broken my trust. I began reclaiming my routine. Mornings started with coffee on the balcony, watching the city wake up. I reconnected with old friends, joined a small yoga class, and even signed up for evening courses I had postponed for years. Every day I reminded myself, betrayal doesn't define me. Survival does. There were still moments when memories hit me. The harassment, the lies, the moments I trusted and was deceived. They stung sharply, but each time I reminded myself of the steps I had taken to protect myself. I journaled often, sometimes just fragments of thoughts or quotes I needed to anchor myself. I am not the sum of what others did to me. I am what I choose to do next. Eventually, I stopped checking Mark's social media. I didn't need to know where he was or who he was with. My peace mattered more than the remnants of a life that had betrayed me. At work, I rebuilt professional confidence. I learned to trust my instincts, speak up sooner, and maintain boundaries firmly. The office was no longer a battlefield. It was a place where I could be competent and respected. One evening, as I sat on the balcony with the sunset painting the sky in shades of gold, I realized something important. I had survived. I had faced harassment, betrayal, and heartbreak, and I was still standing. I thought I was trapped, I whispered, but I am free. Not because they changed, but because I chose to reclaim myself. I knew the healing wasn't over and some scars would remain. But for the first time in a long time, I felt the possibility of hope. And that, I decided, was enough to move forward.